Well, it gives me tremendous pleasure to welcome back to the Mr. Barton Mass podcast. It's been too long. He is fan favourite, the multi-returning guest. It is, of course, the fantastic Kris Boulton. Hello, Kris. How are you, mate?
Craig, doing really well. How have you been getting on?
Very good, mate. We're recording this on a very hot day. Kris, if you're watching this on the video, Kris is looking very smart, open collar, crisp, white shirt. I'm dripping with sweat in a cheap cotton yellow t-shirt. So it's only going to get worse as the conversation progresses, but I'm looking forward to this one. Tell us a little bit about yourself, mate.
Goodness, what do we still need to know that I haven't already said?
Let's assume, you never know. People are coming at this cold.
Yeah,
so let's assume they don't know you.
Yeah, so for the past couple of years, along with Naveen Rizvi, we co-founded Unstoppable Learning, and we've been growing that. We're working with schools and chains of schools from Australia. I'm just going across the globe here: Australia, New Zealand. I've done the wrong way. New Zealand, Australia, some of the Middle East, England, Scotland, and the United States. And our goal is the same goal it's ever been, which is to make failure in mathematics completely obsolete. So every kid being successful. I think we've got on the website, we think 95% of kids could be getting grade 9. You know what? I think I've been saying things like that for about 15 years now. And in the beginning, it was just this article of faith. I don't know why. I don't know why I thought it was true, but I did. I've seen enough today to think, to know that that is true, insofar as anything can be known that has never been attained. So really, and we're living it every day. A conversation with one of our New Zealand teachers just this morning, talking about a class who she'd put something up in front of them. They thought it was completely impossible. And then sure enough, 10 minutes later, they could not only do it, but they couldn't believe how relatively easy it was. So that is our lived reality every day, is just teachers and students being more successful than they ever imagined possible. It's really exciting. It's really good fun. Just can't wait to get it into more schools, more teachers, more kids benefiting.
So if that has whet your appetite, listeners, for more, we've got an entire Kris Boulton back catalogue on the podcast. We've got from the early days, many, many years ago, probably close to a decade ago, when you first started telling me about this approach and this idea, right through to our Atomization in Action mini-series, where we're joined by Lee Wheeler, who tells us about using these principles in real-life classrooms. So listeners can dive into that, the wonderful world of unstoppable learning, direct instruction, Engelman, all that. You've got a whole world awaiting for you there. But we are here today as part of the AI in Education mini-series. And I know from conversations with you, Kris, that you have, three reasons. One, you're always fun to talk to, but I know you've visited a place that's come up a lot in this series already that I want to talk to you about.
Yeah.
And also, like me, you're a fellow AI obsessive when it comes to playing around with its capabilities in terms of resource creation and so on. So I thought they'd be two interesting areas to dabble into. But an opening question I always like to ask my guests before we get into the education side of things is, what's your personal relationship with AI like, Kris? Were you an early adopter as soon as ChatGPT launched? And what role is it playing in your day-to-day life?
It is now my everything. As of a couple of weeks ago, I'm probably having more conversations with the AI now than I am with real people. It would be worrying if it just weren't so darn useful. I think when ChatGPT launched it was 3 years ago, unbelievable, more or less. And I thought then it was a very impressive piece of tech. And speculating, gosh, has this passed the Turing test? This is like nothing I've ever seen. But then once the novelty wears off, what do I do with it? Well, what's it actually good for? And the answer back then was absolutely nothing. And it didn't take too long when they gave it access to the internet, and suddenly it became a much more effective search tool than Google. And so for quite a while, probably a year after that, the big thing for me was I would just constantly be using it for search or to answer questions. So much better at interpreting questions and answering them. But the real game changer as of just a few weeks ago, so I've sort of had a free Claude account for a while. You're using Claude a lot. I know you've been talking about it. I heard Becky was talking about it. The first time you mentioned it to me, I remember going, "What's Claude?" You say, "I've put your randomization stuff in a Claude, and it's done this." Like, what the hell's Claude? So I had a free account for a while. I did up it to a paid account in addition to ChatGPT after you and Duncan, who we've had on the podcast as well, we started talking about how he'd been using it to generate some materials. And then I don't even know what it was, but I finally figured out how to use the co-work feature. Plus, no, this was the big thing to begin with. Opus 4.7 came out. It's so interesting that Becky doesn't like Opus 4.7 because I think I get what she's saying about how it's a bit slow. It wants to sort of think really deeply about everything. But for me, I feel like I can just trust its output
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
much more than anything else. It has been better than anything else able to generate mathematical exercises, answers, diagrams, which are if they're what 90% good at worst, and they're all usable. You could put them in front of
Yeah.
kids that know what to do; it'd be
Yeah.
fine. But it's also things that probably wouldn't impress or be of interest as much to other people. But I can use it for everything. It's running my life now. It's running everything.
Yeah.
But suddenly it's doing that dream thing of the virtual AI assistant that Siri always promised to be. All of it. It's
Give me a
checking
few. Give me a
emails
few.
and
Yeah,
things.
give me a few practical things it's doing there, Kris. Yeah. So you've got linked up your emails and stuff, have you?
I think one of the first things maybe it did. I was looking for a way of scheduling. ChatGPT has this ability to schedule tasks that happen on a repeated basis. So I have a few of those going where every week it'll look for updates in the news about a particular topic. And I wanted to try and use Claude for that for some reason. And when I clicked in, it has helpful prompts. And one was going to be, do you want like a daily briefing? And I said, well, okay, let's start with that. What do you need and how would that work? I said, well, I can search your emails and tell you what's come in since yesterday and what, might still need processing and help triage them for you. And I can check your diary for you. Oh, I can check your to-do list and update that or let you know about that. So these are things that until recently I would have been very nervous about connecting because there are security risks. And I think what changed was, well, Google has integrated Gemini anyway, because I've got a business account for my Gmail. So I get a little bit of Gemini. And when I've asked it, hey, can you find emails from like whatever? Can you do that for me? It does it better than search.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
so if Gemini's already got access, why not give Claude access?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it's able to do things like we get more emails in than we can process. So and in particular, the worst of this is we probably get more emails from individual teachers, but we don't have a specific product offer for individual teachers. So
Yeah.
we've said publicly we probably aren't able to help you right now, and we can't process them enough. But I'm nervous every day. I'm anxious every day about the fact we've had all these people who love what we're doing, who said really nice things about us, who are looking for help, and we haven't done anything to respond to them, and that makes me feel a bit uneasy and a little bit upset. And I was able to say to Claude, like, look, just go through all my emails and find every email I've had that fits this category. Rambling, much like I've just rambled to you and your audience, exactly the same. It's all voice to text. And then just give me the names and email addresses. And it was able to piece all of that together. So have I done anything with that? Not just yet, but I could now very easily start doing things which allows us just to reach out to people and say thank you, for example.
Yeah.
So we can't help you just yet, but we will in the future. So simple things like that, or even just sort of managing. You go around London, you see posters for interesting looking events. You say, "Oh, that looks really good. I'd love to go to that," and then you forget about it and you never go. And that's all of our lives. We're just not doing things that we wish we were doing all the time. Now, I could snap a photo or quickly sort of talk into my phone saying, "Hey, look up this event, add all the salient details to my to-do list, give it an absolute deadline by which it'll probably run out of tickets, give me a due date to think seriously about going and figure out and give me the estimated costs and give me a direct link to the booking site." And now when I go to my to-do list on a given day, that's just going to pop up into my to-do list and I can take 5 minutes to think about it and make a decision. Am I going to go or am I not? And either way, I either go to the booking link, book the tickets, and then check it as done, or I don't do anything because I decide against it and check it as done. But at least I've made a conscious choice now
Yeah.
instead of, things got in the way. It's absolutely game-changing, and a big one around resources as well, which I can leave for the end.
What are you using for your to-do list, Kris?
I've been using Todoist on and off for a very
So
long
yeah,
time.
I used Todoist as well. So you've linked it up to that,
Yeah.
have you? Because I've not gone right. I need to do that.
Yeah, I revived it because it integrates with Claude. basically. So it does everything now. It's sorted out project structures, sections, labels, the whole thing. It'll move things around, give them different priorities. It's just like nothing else that has existed before. The barrier to figuring this out is it's weird. It's like it's so unlike any technology that's existed to this day. Genuinely, there was even a point 2 or 3 years ago where I was thinking that I might finally have hit that point in life where I'm too old. This is it. I've been a techie my whole life. My dad once quipped that my first word was computer. And now this is it. I've hit my limit. I can't keep up with the pace of change anymore. I'm out. Um, but once you get over that hurdle, that's it. You start to see the potential, and you're probably evangelizing the way you see Carl Hendrick talking about it. Even just, you know what, I was listening to earlier today, your interview with Dan Mayer, and Dan was talking about, what was the word? He described it as euphoric, I think, working with Claude Code.
Mm-hmm.
And I know the reason I don't do that yet, I'm not building prototypes with Claude Code, is mainly because I know how to code, more or less. And I've had exposure to it as a kid, as a teenager. Again, techie growing up. The problem is today, to do coding seriously, you need to understand what's called software development environment. And that's a collection of different tools. Things like Git, which many people on the call would never have heard of. Things like version management matters. I think terminals and shells and all these things, branching and merge requests. You need to know what APIs and webhooks are. And there's all this stuff, which isn't about coding. It's about modern software engineering infrastructure. And I just had this epiphany when I was listening to Dan speak. And I went to co-work. I was like, look, new project. You are a CTO with a strong track record in coaching and mentoring new software engineers. Here's my contacts, etc., etc. Let's go. Chat number one in that project, I want you to design me a course that will take me from, I can sort of code a bit, to explaining all of the basics, all the way through to, I can use Claude Code really effectively to produce projects that are essentially commercially viable and that I could theoretically hand off to a proper software engineer, and they would be able to read the code, understand it, maintain it, and develop it from there if that's what I want to do. And then it's just produced it. It's produced a whole learning program for me, 20 modules. I then asked it to turn those into interactive visualizations so it was easy to navigate, did that for me. And then all I have to do is click on a module, it copies a prompt for me, which I start as a new chat in the project, and then it generates a new interactive visualization of all the content, all the lessons that are going to be in this thing, with exercises for me to attempt, which it will then grade for me, with a capstone project at the end of it all. And you want to talk about using AI to learn. It's
Yeah.
extraordinary. It's absolutely extraordinary what's possible now. However, to do any of this, I had to upgrade the paid account. You can't do
Yeah.
it with even the £20 or $20 a
No.
month account, whatever it is.
No.
So between that and then you're paying for Todoist and you're paying for Whisper AI, which I know you're a big fan of as well,
Yeah.
it adds up, all this stuff.
Yeah.
So, but it is interesting. It's very
Well, I'll
exciting.
tell you what. Listen. If we've any listeners still with us here, they're the fellow geeks,
Yeah.
Chris. Right? So we can go as deep
So
as
we're
we want with
safe.
this kind
We're
of stuff.
okay.
We're absolutely safe. So well done, people, sticking with us. I'm going to share two recent use cases that I've been messing around before we dive into the education. So first, meetings have been. Events have been a big one for me. So I'm big time these days, Chris. So I've got an agent now who people go through to book me for talks and stuff. And often I'll get this like booking form through, but sometimes things will be missing from it, blah, blah, blah. So I've set up this little thing in Claude. It's a Claude project. And I just say, look, I'm doing a talk in Colchester next Wednesday. Can you just put all the details on a single side of A4? And it does that for me. But then what I've also trained it to do is so it knows what details I normally need, like start time, who I'm meeting, when the breaks are, what the tech setup is, who the audience is, what they've asked me to talk about, blah, blah, blah. And then it knows that if any of those details are missing, it then drafts me an email to the person who's booked me with those missing things, really polite in my style. I just review it, click send, and I'm good to go. So it's absolute game change for that. So that's number one. And that's linking it up to the calendar and Gmail. But the other, Chris, in terms of like my fitness slash lifestyle coach, it is different level. So he knows everything about me. I now log every run I do, every rep I do at the gym. Last night I told it all my products I own for like the smart weighing scale, the bloody toothbrush I have, everything. And then it's just done a full audit on my life, suggesting these key upgrades and stuff. It knows obviously my age. It knows all the medication, all the supplements I have, my meal plan. It's like an absolute joke how good it is. But my wife goes mad at me, as I'm sure Naveen maybe does with you, because like, you're obsessed with it. Like, Claude knows more about you than I do. You spend more time chatting to Claude than I do. I'm like you, I'm whisper flow. So I'm physically chatting to him 23 hours a day or something like that. Kris, are you at the stage where I am now where, let's imagine Claude disappears. Are you screwed there? Like, I think I am. I don't know what I'm doing.
I think so. I don't know. I mean, I get one thing we can say about the human condition is we are infinitely adaptable. So maybe I'm okay. But I suppose another way of answering the question is it is fully integrated into my way of life. I can't remember, I don't remember the name of the person you had on, early AI conversation. He had the line, technology is, what was it, ecological,
Yes,
not His point was, as technologies get integrated into our everyday lives, it becomes increasingly difficult for us to survive as a species without them. So
that's
when
right.
everyone was arguing, look, during the pandemic, we managed to not fly. We don't need aeroplanes. That was a bit naive because that was a very special moment. And actually,
Yes.
we just do. You have to just live with that. I think we're heading that way. I don't think we're there yet on a societal level because not that many people have cleared that wall. And I actually think there's a level beyond us. I get emails from certain things I subscribe to and rarely read, where they're talking about people spinning up £4,000 or £5,000 a month businesses using a bit of AI, and then just multiple agents who just take care of things and they kick back. I mean, survivorship bias, maybe 5 people out of 1,000 who try to do it are succeeding, and then those become the stories. But still, that's not no one. And maybe the other 995 try again and keep going until they get there. We're just, there's so many that I haven't seen a technology pull people apart in terms of their adoption and the value they get out of the amount of their adoption as rapidly as this. It
Yeah.
is, I feel like there's a lot going on that you and I are now seeing that most people are probably maybe are completely blind to and are even
Mm,
struggling to visualize. And then I feel like there's this level beyond which you and I aren't seeing yet, where people are just using these agents, like you say, to run their businesses now, and
yeah.
automating everything. Goodness, it's 3 years since a chatbot came out. And this is what the hell happens in the next 3 years? I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a great segue into the topic of this conversation.
Love it, Kris. You're a professional podcast guest these days. I love that. One thing I'll put on the table for us to talk about later when we talk about, so we're going to split this conversation into two. We're going to do the personal tuition side of things now, and then we're going to do resource creation. One thing I've written down on my notes here to talk about with resource creation is how the hell is anybody making any money out of this? And I know from our conversations we've had on WhatsApp, you sometimes say to me like, "What? Why are you producing this and giving it for free?" It's like, so this is the business side of things I'd like to dig into. So listeners like that kind of stuff as well. So I'll park that for now. Right. Okay. So as regular listeners will know, I normally offer guests 3 areas to talk about: personal tuition, and planning slash teacher development, and then assessment. So with you, I want to focus on those first 2 areas because it's like a dream for me, having spoken to Adam Boxer and then to Carl Hendrick and also Becky, and also Dan Mayer as well. And we've touched upon Alpha School. It's become a bit of a cliche in this podcast series that we always come back to it. And some people find it very interesting. Some people don't think it's that interesting a case. But you've been. So here's what I want to know from you, Kris. And you structure this however you want, and I'll keep making notes and keep coming back at you with gaps. I want to know about your visit to Alpha School in 3 areas. I want to know how on earth you got yourself an invite there. I want to know what surprised you and what didn't.
Yeah.
And I want to know what's working and what isn't.
I think a couple of things I need to say up front. Number one, I haven't seen anywhere near as much of Alpha School as Becky and Becky and Carl have seen. So I got to spend a working day at the New York campus, a little bit more time there the next day. And I also got to attend a parent information evening. So I've seen how they speak with prospective parents. I've seen what it looks like for prospective parents who have a child with them who's spending a day there, seeing what that's like for that child. Um, but I get the feeling there's a lot I haven't seen, especially being in New York. So that school was set up last September with 10 kids. It had 40 kids by the time I was there, age from maybe 5 or 6, I think, up to 13, 14. And it's probably grown since then already. But I think Carl and Becky, they visited the Austin schools, where they've got many schools. They're bigger. They've been around for longer. They had the secondary school, the high schools they got to visit, and so forth. The second thing I think I would have to say up front is the Alpha School vision is very much my vision. So I'm very biased in favor of everything they're doing right from the off, from the sense of, for the past 10 years, I'm starting to work with Uplearn. This is the kind of thing we would talk about a lot internally. We would, I think we had something more like, what if you could spend three at the morning, maybe it's 3 hours, it's learning through the digital technology, but then your afternoon could be anything. So this whole inquiry, minimally guided, project-based learning versus explicit instruction thing, maybe that whole argument could just stop.
Yeah.
Because very often people are talking at cross purposes in that argument. There is something of value. They have different learning goals quite often. They're trying to do different things. And what they're trying to do isn't spoken overtly enough up front. But they're both of value. And the reason people who go down the explicit instruction route tend to fight their corner is I think they understand some of the other goals, but they think they're not attainable until we've first got these basics down, if it's a rudimentary way of putting it. But whereas on the other side, I think they tend to think, no, but you can learn that at the same time. So that's okay. I know you almost tried to, I think you or Dan tried to skirt that part of the conversation a little bit, but it was almost that was what was coming across with we give them anchors and something else with the submarine. This idea that they'll learn about addition and subtraction via this investigative medium at the same time. So those are the 2 points of contention. Well, here is, well, you can do both. You could theoretically have your explicit direct instruction through some kind of digital medium in the morning. You can do exploration and investigation and project-based stuff to your heart's content in the afternoon. So that was always our vision. We often talked about, wouldn't it be great if we could run a school, actually control how the school was set up so we could test these things out properly, but we weren't set up to do that.
Hey, sorry, Kris, just interrupt you. Can I just ask on that? Because I know listeners will want to know this, and I'm not 100% sure what your answer to this is going to be. When you say that was kind of your dream for the explicit instruction in the morning, the project-based stuff in the afternoon, why have the project-based stuff at all? Is that because you inherently think there is a value to it, or is it because you think it's either not sustainable or nobody would attend the school if it was just direct instruction 6 hours a day?
So for one, you're definitely not going to want 6 hours a day on screen, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
Can't tell you why. I'm not sure that is appealing to anybody. I mean, Becky made the point, well, I spend 8 hours a day on screen for my job. So maybe I'm jumping the gun there. Maybe that's okay. Lee, I think our current structures are not nearly as efficient as they could be. So one of the things you'll get in the edtech sector is constantly this line, school is broken. School is broken and we need to fix it. Absolute nonsense. Schools are a modern miracle. Good God, you go back a century, you've got no universal education, right? No universal education. You've got political arguments saying, well, the poor can't learn, so there's no point teaching the poor. You've got, well, what have we got today? 600,000 teachers? So you don't have 600,000 teachers. You've probably got a few tens of thousands. You don't have school buildings all up and down the country. We've somehow built an infrastructure, inordinate capital expense up and down the whole of the United Kingdom, with school buildings, having trained and developed hundreds of thousands of teachers, building out this entire, and what a massive political argument, so that every single individual child in the country goes to school, which is not a thing that used to happen and still doesn't happen in the vast majority of the world. Absolute miracle. Unbelievably extraordinary. Our frustrations are not that school is broken. It's that somewhere along the line, we've moved from an attitude of there's only so much you can do with these kids through to no, for one reason or another, we believe that the human potential of those individuals is far greater than what they're achieving today. How do we get there? So right now, I think schooling is probably a fraction, an absolute fraction as efficient as it could be. And by that, what I mean is some people don't like the use of the word efficiency in education. They like more naturalistic language, more romantic with a capital R language. But all I mean is, given the same amount of time, you learn more or you learn less. Why would you not want everybody to learn more given the same amount of time? Why, in what world do you say, given the amount of time we have, I want those kids to leave having learnt less? As it doesn't make sense to me. So that's all I mean by efficiency is you get to learn more. Now, I do think there's a little bit of a danger that if we achieve this goal of dramatically improving education efficiency, the next line of reasoning becomes, wow, they're learning so much more, say in 2 or 3 hours. How much more could they learn if we give them another 2 or 3 hours doing it? And I worry about that a little bit because when you look at the condition in the tiger economies, where they've got this enormous industry around the so-called tiger tutors and incredibly high stakes, life-altering exams, a lot of what's coming out there seems to be the idea that that's not a good way to live and that children are not growing up particularly happy and that's translating into how they feel as grown-ups and so forth. So partly I just want to safeguard against that. And then to
Hmm.
your point about the inherent value, could there be inherent value in it? Absolutely, of course there is. Of course there is. Look, the thing that I loved about Dan Mayer's TED Talk when I first saw it, he's talking about how you can take a textbook and you fill this octagonal tank with these dimensions, with water flowing at this rate, how long until it's filled? And essentially what you're doing is learning how to take the exact numbers you've given, plug them into a particular formula that you've remembered, and then derive and answer that question. Fine. That's what a lot of maths education looks like. It struck me at the time because I was doing a lot of applying to these big global management consultancies. And I'd recently come across this type of question they might ask where the one that always stuck in my head was, our client is an iron mining company. They have just purchased a piece of iron-rich ore in Australia. I want you to tell me if they should mine the ore. In giving me your answer, tell me the fixed costs, the capital expenditure, the impact on the global market, and something else. And I saw that question as just like a sort of interview prep question, and just thought, how the hell am I supposed to know the answer to that? How could I possibly answer that question? It's just a complete blank. And what I learned through practicing for these types of things is you're supposed to ask for the information that you need. So you learn to ask questions like, okay, well, how much, oh, that was at the break-even point. So what you're supposed to ask for is, well, what is the capital expenditure required for the equipment? Okay, well, what is the revenue estimation per month or per year from the iron ore that we iron? And then you just do a simple division. You have to learn to ask questions. So if you go back to Dan's thing, it might be, he would say, remove the information. And you're just saying a bucket's filling with water, how long until it's full? Now you have to ask questions. What shape is the bucket? What are its dimensions? You start to think about things you wouldn't have otherwise thought of, like, is there a hole anywhere in the bucket? And where the hole is, whether it's on the bottom or halfway up, is going to change things quite a bit. You have to ask for the flow rate of the water. You have to ask if there's only one water source. You have to ask questions. So there's obviously something inherently valuable in that. There's something inherently valuable in investigation. There's something inherently valuable in sort of inquiry more broadly. What's the other thing problem we have? Science versus mathematics. People know what a scientist does. If you tell them, what do you do for a job? I'm a scientist. Oh, okay. I've got a general idea what that is. Tell them I'm a mathematician. No idea. Ask most math teachers, what does a mathematician do? They will not know the answer. So we're doing something in schools, which means collectively as a society, we have no idea what the discipline of mathematics is. I think it's just because we get kids to do about 9 or 10 experiments every year. They're really dodgy. They're not very good. The answers already exist in the textbook, but they get a sense of what it looks like. That then gets written into TV and film. Mathematics, never do it. Entirely possible to do. The one lesson, more or less, I can remember from my primary school maths education was being asked to investigate this pattern to do with triangles sometime. It was the best experience I had in maths the whole time. I don't remember much about it except how it made me feel. The classic. So there's something there. There's all kinds of things we could do with that time if we're being creative. And if we say, look, there's a baseline body of cultural knowledge across these subjects and disciplines that we want every citizen to know, and we can get them there and then some within just 2 hours a day. And then we've got all this other time we can use for exploring all kinds of other life affirming, developmental, educational activities. Why wouldn't we choose that over let's just try to cram more maths in your brain before you leave school at 16 or 18?
It's interesting that though, Chris, right? Because I mean, if I was like bloody Stephen Bartlett on Diary of a CEO, I could clip that up and make you sound like some, crazy progressive, right? That you're just like inquiry all the way. And it's interesting that because I think I would potentially get a similar sentiment from Dan, or even let's go to an extreme like Andrew Blair, who I interviewed many years ago, who would be a big inquiry maths advocate. But it's important to stress that you do see this as valuable, this way of thinking, this skill, for want of a better phrase, that kids need to develop for asking questions, but not at the expense of the kind of direct instruction that's come before it, right? You're not talking 6 hours of this.
Yeah, to give it and I know and to answer your question, how did the trip come about? Look, I think the simplest, most straightforward language for thinking about this, which in my mind makes it very clean and easy, and we're not arguing over, is it a skill or not a skill, and what is a skill anyway, is to think in terms of disciplinary knowledge and substantive knowledge. And that's always easiest to understand in terms of science and history first. Substantive is what we know. Disciplinary is how we come to know it. So scientific knowledge, substantive would be Newton's three laws of motion or Einstein's theory of relativity. The disciplinary knowledge is what do scientists do to figure out the three laws of motion or Einstein's relativity? And in history, it's, well, what do we know about the past? What do we know happened 1,000 years ago? And then the disciplinary knowledge is, how do we know that that happened? How can we possibly know that 1,000 years on? What did historians do to figure that out enough to have confidence in it? In mathematics, we do a lot of the substantive teaching, but we never expose students to that question of, but how do mathematicians come to know this? Becky talked about, wouldn't it be great if we were able to teach in school the history of mathematics? Of course we should be teaching the history of mathematics. Otherwise you think it just manifested out of nowhere the day you were born. You have to understand what problems were encountered historically that warranted people to go for a solution that made them want to achieve that. So that's the first thing that I think is important. If you think in terms of substantive and disciplinary and actually get rid of a little bit of ideas like inquiry and project-based and skill, that is just an incredibly clean line to get your head around. But then the second thing is you can't develop substantive knowledge through disciplinary activities. And in order to become practiced with disciplinary knowledge, you need an absolute truckload of substantive knowledge. Now, that's my position, that's my argument. How right am I? I don't know. Christine Counsell would argue in history the two are somewhat inseparable, that you will always have to be exposed to the disciplinary as you're learning the substantive. Maybe she's right or wrong. Maybe it's different for history. I don't know. But I think the big sort of error that we see making with inquiry proponents is you can learn the substantive knowledge of mathematics through inquiry methods. So even with Dan's submarine example, I might argue maybe that worked. Maybe that worked. So my first question is, he said 35 kids. Did it work for all 35 kids? My next question is, how do you know? My challenge becomes, if even one of them didn't succeed, that's not good enough. My following challenge becomes, how long did that take? Because I bet I could achieve what you achieved in a fraction of the time via a different approach. His challenge might then be, yes, but there were many other things that they developed from that which were valuable. They saw that their thoughts were valued by their teacher, and this was a sort of more interesting exposure at the beginning of it, to which I might respond, well, yeah, but if I can get that down to 10% of the time, I've just freed up 90% of the time to do things like what you described, but from a base of firm knowledge. And we can even get into more challenging things like trying to figure these things out. There's loads of maths problems that I love, which are almost unique. What if I tell you the answer? That's it. It's done. I've ruined the game for you. So you've just got to give it a go. And it could take you hours over days in order to figure out the answer, if at all. And you might fail, and I might have to tell you eventually. And there's basically nothing to learn. This is the good thing about it. There's nothing to learn from that exercise except what it is like to be stuck on a problem for hours and days. That's what you are learning. Once you solve it, you have learned nothing about mathematics. You've learned no new substantive knowledge. You've just seen something about what it is like to fail or succeed in applying the substantive knowledge you already know. And I think if you could get a course in that designed really well, you'd probably find there's a sweet spot for success against failure. Maybe it's 80%. And you design programs and problems and explorations and a whole thing around it, which would still have kids tending towards success, whilst also giving them some where they're genuinely going to fail, and and they learn that failure is okay and why it's okay and what you do with it. But we have got, what is it, 70% of kids achieving a grade 4, 30% of kids aren't even achieving a grade 4 in GCSE. Like barely 50% are achieving grade 5 in GCSE maths, and that's what you want to faff about with? No, 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 no. No, we don't have time for this. We need to do the things that are going to get them to grade 7, 8, 9 ASAP. Then we can do it in a way that is so efficient that then you've got all this time available to do all those other things which are genuinely important and useful. That's the difference in position. You can do both at the same time. You need one. It's very efficient to do. It's very easy to do. Kids can be massively successful. They start to think of themselves as mathematical. They believe in themselves in a way they traditionally don't. And then you've got all this opportunity to put them into much riskier, more challenging environments as well.
So this fascinating, Chris, and we've got up. So we're not even close to getting to your trip to
I
Alpha
haven't even
Schools.
told you how I got there.
No,
Yeah, I know.
no. And I'm going to take us on another diversion now, right? Because one of the things I chatted with Dan, where we talked about you on this, is Dan's aspirin and headache framework there that you love and I love. And this ties into a guest who's coming up on this series, Manu Kapoor, who is a big proponent of productive failure, which would be, you could argue, a more, I think this blunt way of describing it, but a more extreme version of the aspirin headache, where kids struggle from it, potentially fail in the sense that they can't answer a question that the teachers pose, but by some mechanism that then propels them to understand the method when the teacher does show them to do it. Now, what interests me about this, Kris, is if we talk about efficiency, the most efficient thing to do is to not use the aspirin headache thing, right? It's just to teach them straight away whatever procedure, whatever concepts. If we take the negative numbers, let's not let them struggle at all. Let's show them how to add negative numbers or subtract negative numbers. So where does aspirin headache fit in for you? And how do you reconcile it in terms of efficiency?
Yeah. We put it into a part of our programs that deals with motivation. So when it comes to learning from the perspective of, if I have somebody who is attentive at any level of the ability spectrum, we can completely guarantee their success. You can try to force attention. I don't know if force is a strong word. You can create structures and norms in order to strongly encourage attention. And the more extreme schools have reputations for a certain amount of, it's sometimes described as militancy around what's expected of kids in the room. That's an option. And you could also just describe it as norming. You just make it a norm that you are paying attention at all times. That's one way of doing it. And you can achieve that even when the kid would rather be thinking about something else. It's just, yeah, but my interest, I've got to do it. Everyone else is doing it. I might as well do it. I'm going to get demerit if I don't do it, that kind of thing. But also, it's just like a pretty sad way to spend 5 years of your life if you're going to maths lessons and every day your teacher's saying to you, right, I'm going to show you how to do this thing. Now let's go do this thing. And then the next bit is this bit, and then you do this bit. It's like, come on, it's boring. We want it to be interesting. And so there's multiple ways, I think, of setting up the headache aspirin thing. And some of it is, Dan's got some amazing examples on his old blog, which I tend to refer to. You can, I find if I'm ever stuck, the first place to look is history. Like, why was this of interest to people historically? What were the challenges with it? Why did they throw it out? Bring it back to AI. That's now brilliant for this because you can just ask it. And then you say, well, who were the main players? What were the significant things? When did it all change? Great. Turn that into a 200-word story for me with character, conflict. I don't know what the other two C's are. Resolutions and art. Context. I can't remember. But that kind of thing. And it's not a 200-word story that's going to set the world on fire. It ain't going to win any Pulitzer Awards. But it's better than what kids are getting otherwise, which is today we are learning to, my Walt is this, my Wilf is this, copy it into your exercise book. Come on. It's boring. So historical narrative is really good. Another one is just presenting them with something they think they could do, but they can't. So a classic trick would be you give them 3 right angle triangles, 2, you ask them for the lengths, missing lengths of all 3. The first 2, they can find using Pythagoras' theorem. The third they can't because there's a side missing, but there's an angle, and there's your cue for, aha, well, let me show you how to do this one. Or an example I've been using with teachers recently, I've used it for gradient, I've used it for area. Present them with 2 lines and ask them which has the higher gradient. I did this with primary school teachers. Only about 10% of the class, 10% of the group actually knew what gradient was. So I give them 3 options, line A, line B, or don't know, or unsure, either of the 2. 90% put their hand up for don't know. So, okay, well, tell them very rudimentarily, the more vertical it is, the higher the gradient. Here was A. Oh, okay, great. Okay, we'll give you another go. Try it this time. And now it's frustrating because I've presented 2 lines that look almost identical in their gradient.
Yeah.
It's really annoying. And then if you just put a number on it, actually you can put a grid on it first. And with a grid, you can just see, that one's a little more vertical than the other one. You can sort of see it. You go 50% that way. Put a number on it, 100% of them. Take the line away, give them 2 new numbers. You can still say which line is more vertical or has the higher gradient. Now we're learning something about the power of numbering things and why we bother doing it, measurement and counting in reality. You do the same thing with area. Give them 2 rectangles, one's obviously 3, one's obviously the biggest, which has the biggest area. Great. Now give them a circle, a triangle, and a rectangle of roughly equivalent size. Becomes incredibly difficult to say which has the biggest area. Wouldn't it be so much easier if we could put a number on it? So you can start with, we've got a number, and then you get into, well, where did those numbers come from? How did I do that? Where did I come up with those numbers? And then you can, from the ground up, get into counting units, which don't have to be squares. Coincidentally, they can be literally any shape at all. Some shapes are better than others: triangles, hexagons, and rectangles and squares. Then you end up settling on units, actual units, which are equilateral triangles, regular rectangles, squares, and regular hexagons. Then squares end up winning it out because they have slight advantages over triangles and hexagons. So there's this whole thing you could do, which makes it much more interesting as we build up more and more and more knowledge.
But I'll tell you what's interesting about this, Kris, and again, we will get to Alpha School, I promise, but I think this is an interesting diversion here, right? If people were to characterize your work, they'd say, okay, it's atomization, it's Engelmann, it's logical faultless communication. You said to me years ago, and this always stuck with me, you should never ask a question. Something I always misquote you on this, but it's along the lines of...
Never ask a question to which they don't already know the answer.
There you go. Much better than I was going to say. But the 2 kind of phases of teaching that you've described here, the headache aspirin kind of opener, and then this potential kind of inquiry closer, they break both of those things, right? Because the whole thing with the headache aspirin is you're asking questions to kids that they don't know the answer to, so they're going to get things wrong. It's certainly not logically faultless communication. And same with the inquiry thing, right at the end. You're not guaranteeing 100% success there. So the reason I'm highlighting this is, firstly, I think it's a mischaracterization of what you kind of stand for and believe in, to think that you're kind of all in on atomization and logically faultless communication, and that's the be all and end all. But also, do you see a contradiction there, or is there not one?
There's no contradiction. It's about stages. So the reason you won't find me talking much about inquiry, etc., is that there's no point. We're nowhere near there. On a school level, we are nowhere near the point where kids are being successful enough across the board that you have got the time to mess around with that, which is really sad, because there's so much that we can do, which is so powerful and interesting. People who lead with that, and that's their thing, and that's what they're excited about, I think, frankly, they're too happy. They're too content with low levels of attainment. So I think we need to if we're at a point where 90% of the school population were achieving a grade 6+, let's put it there. At that point, I would say, guys, we've got more work to do, but I think we're at the point where maybe we can very seriously consider this other important stuff. Because you're now getting a lot of kids who are going to be at the 6 to 9 stage, a lot of them. And you've probably got scope and space to give them something different. You're not going to see it register on the GCSE exam. It's not going to change their life chances in terms of employment because it won't register there directly. But it will. It's part of the sort of civilizing mission of schooling and education more broadly. It will give them much greater exposure to what mathematics really is. Most people don't know what mathematics is. I'm still working with teachers who are confused when I use the word arithmetic, because to them, crunching numbers is mathematics. Secondary school teachers, not primary. So we have a great confusion in society about what mathematics is more broadly. And the only reason I'm not more strongly advocating for going in that direction is because we can't. We're failing at we're not really, we're not so much failing because, as I said at the start, the universal education, I mean, what if you remove schools and universal education as we have it? It's just so much worse. It's just we have these grand aspirations. There's so much more potential that people have, and we're not yet achieving it. And I just think we should be we shouldn't be arguing about it. We should be single-mindedly focused on achieving that. And until we do, I don't think we should be having more like fanciful and wishful debates about reimagining what mathematics will look like. I hope we get
But,
there. I want us
but
to
the
get there.
headache aspirin
That's about
stuff,
stages. Heading
the
aspirate.
headache aspirin X
Okay.
and O though, right?
When I would say you shouldn't ask kids a question to which they don't already know the answer, that is a direct response to what is happening 10, 15 years ago, where essentially teachers are being told things like, by Ofsted, if the teacher is talking, then students are not learning. And instruction, teaching, was entirely couched, and CPD was entirely revolving around the idea of asking questions and asking better questions and what those should look like. So I would go into lessons and constantly people would be asking things like, what does globalization mean to you? What do you think globalization means? Or Daisy had her example, which we talked about on the No Sacred Cows podcast, where she kicked off an early lesson on Shakespeare with a picture of Shakespeare on the board. And she asks the class, right, Shakespeare, who knows about Shakespeare? What do you know about Shakespeare? And just gets absolute tumbleweed until she finally gets one brave soul raising his hand to say, oh, miss, didn't he write that film? And then somebody else, feeling emboldened, chips in with, yeah, and he was gay, wasn't he, miss? And it's like, oh dear. It's like, okay, he was a
Yeah.
writer, but that's about it. Or
Yeah.
Robert Peel wrote in one of his books a similar example about how he's having to teach the kids about Napoleon. And he does a similar thing. Picture of Napoleon on the board. What do you know about Napoleon? So, why? Probably nothing. You can probably assume they know little or nothing. Why don't you just tell them an interesting story about Napoleon? So that's what that was a direct response to. So
Yeah.
I suppose that was coming from the perspective of questions and the type of questions and the rhetoric at the time as a tool of teaching or instruction.
Okay.
The headache aspirin thing is about asking questions that are setting students up to want to know, to want
Okay.
to stay with you through some bits that might even be boring for them sometimes. Like got an example we've had on the Substack of this trapezium with all kinds of crazy things going on with the side lengths. And that was created for a mixed ability year 8 class where one of the kids was he was kind of they were dealing with atoms like what would tell the area of this rectangle or what would tell the area of this triangle. So they don't even have to work out the numbers. For the triangle, it is literally just something times something over 2. That is your response. So they're just practicing forming that expression, or you can get into equations like the area of the triangle is this. Given the side lengths, write an equation that relates the side lengths, the lengths given to the area. But for him, he's so far above the rest of the class. He's just instantly being able to take it to the next level and run the calculation. He said, but sir, I know it's this. Why don't I just say it's this? He's getting bored. So he needs something that's, he needs to see something he can't do already.
Yeah.
To be promised that he's going to be able to do it. It seems kind of cool and exciting. And then, but the deal is, but to get there, you just got to give me a day or two, give me a lesson or two, do everything I ask, because the payoff is this thing up here. Or taken from, I think again, Dan talks about this with the headache aspirin thing. He uses the example of algebra. I always like to tell people, go online and just Google algebra makes me feel and then hit return. Oh, the language they use.
Yeah.
And his point is because we make kids feel like algebra is a headache, but it was invented to solve a headache, to be the aspirin.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
reason they feel that way about it is because we never gave them the headache. We introduce algebra. It's like, right, x plus 3 equals 10. Today I'm going to teach you how to solve the equations. So first you have to find the inverse operation, which is subtract. So we're going to subtract 3 from each side. So it's 7.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Obviously 7 plus 3 is equal to 10, but we have to do it this way. But why, sir? It's 7. So instead, I will present kids with a series of problems, word problems. And it might be like, Craig goes and buys a burger and a milkshake for a tenner. Yeah, milkshake costs £3. How much was the burger? And then you can build up those questions until you get to things that are absurdly, as soon as you get to something like, Craig buys a burger and a milkshake for this much money, I don't know, 20 quid. Now, if you subtract 7 from that and double the result, you get an amount that's equal to 3 times the original amount plus 4. How much is a burger? And it's something like that. Basically, as soon as there are unknowns on both sides for the equation, it's really hard to brute force it.
Yeah.
And that's the point of algebra. It helps us to solve problems that look similar in form, but for some reason are more complex. And so you can give kids like 10 of those, and then you can just ask them, right, who got the first one? Everyone. Second one, everyone. Third one, everyone. Fourth one, some hands start to drop. Fifth one, some hands. By the time you get to the 7th one, all the hands are down. And now the deal is, right, give me 2 or 3 weeks. And by the end of that, you see the really complicated one, question number 10. Not only is every single one of you going to be able to answer it, but it's going to feel dead easy. You're going to be amazed it was ever difficult. And that's the sort of build up to learning to solve simultaneous equations. But in order to make it work, I need to show you how to do this for this really simple one, x plus 3 equals 10. So let me show you how it works here. I know you know it's 7, but let me show you how it works. And then I'm going to build up the complexity over the next few weeks. That's why we do the headache aspirin. So there's a reason to learn it.
Okay, Kris. Right. Okay, this is good. Alpha School. About 40 minutes ago, we were discussing your your trip
Why to
there.
go?
And, yeah. So for Kris, just why are you there? Who's inviting you to this? Under what capacity are you going to Alpha School?
Yeah, I just asked. Once I mean, it's weird. It's been about 3 years. 3 years ago is probably the first time I encountered any of the broader Alpha School crossover trilogy, ESW Capital, 2-hour learning, GT School world. There's lots of companies that are all part of the same organization. So from the outside, it can feel extremely opaque and strange and weird at what's going on. But once I started speaking to more people. I had somebody else, Gauntlet is another one. Super Builders is another one. I had somebody with an @superbuilders.com address subscribe to our Substack, and I just thought Super Builders sounds cool. I wonder what Super Builders is. And if you go to superbuilders.com, maybe I could do it now. Superbuilders.com. Is it still there? No, it's not loading, so maybe it's disappeared. But there used to be it was just like a holding web page that said something like, we are building the future of education, lots of exciting stuff, and then not much else. I just thought, that's interesting. So I sent that person a direct message, like, hey, let's have a chat sometime. Sounds really cool what you're doing. Just be good to know a bit more about it. So just speaking to different people like that, Becky and Carl and Zach had reached out and asked me to chat a bit about some of the work they were doing. So I found out a bit more through them. And then I just asked somebody to because I was planning a trip to New York anyway, so I just asked somebody to put me in touch with someone where I could ask, could we come visit your school in New York, please, while we're there? This seems really interesting. I'd love to see what it looks like on the ground. And they just sort of went from there in a nutshell.
Fantastic. All right. Okay. So back to my original kind of framing for this. Tell me
Yeah.
about your trip in kind of in the lens of what surprised you, what didn't, what's working, what isn't.
What surprised me, what didn't? I think probably a big one on what surprised me is just like kids are kids is straight off the bat. So I mean that's come up quite a bit, right? How much can we take from this if they're all well motivated kids from wealthy backgrounds? And there's absolutely validity to that. It's a selective set, absolutely. But I would say rich parents are rich parents. Rich kids are just kids. With all that comes with being a child. So there are obviously going to be some differences obviously, but don't the kids are not the ones who are wealthy and successful and have been through life and figured everything out. It's yeah, there are differences, but it's not. They're still kids.
And
That's a sort of key
what
thing.
age are the kids, Chris, that in the
I
classes you
think it was. I
saw?
think it was around 5 to 6 at the bottom, up to 13, 14, 40 of them. So, like Becky said, so that's another thing that I suppose is it surprising? I don't know, not surprising, but when she said like the schools are weird because they're small, I'd agree with that. It doesn't look like what you and I would normally recognize as a school, and that has consequences for if you ask the question, would you send your own kids there? Would you advocate for your goddaughter to go there? Um, yeah, that's something you'd have to factor in. But
Hmm.
also, small private schools have existed for a long time, and
Yeah,
small
yeah.
private schools have always been a bit weird. And maybe these ones get bigger, or they make some big ones, and you choose between them. That's neither here nor there. Really, that's not really the interesting bit. Um, there were books. I sent you some of those photos. That
Yeah.
surprised me because I'd heard a bit like Adam, like, oh, they don't read anything, they don't read books, everything's on screen. Turns out that's not true. First thing I saw when I went in was this massive library with a huge range of books, everything kids' books up to, wasn't there? We've got the Iliad and so forth in there, and some more sort of adult, quite sort of advanced novels in there to read as well,
And do you get
non-fiction,
this?
addition of fiction.
Do you get the sense they're reading in the afternoons?
I mean, this is one of the places where oh, so do you mean the afternoon at the school as opposed to
Yeah,
while they're there?
yeah, yeah.
So this is one of the big unanswered questions I still have. I don't know. Um, there was on the second day the school sort of split into two halves. There's the older kid half and then the younger kid half. And the younger kids were definitely doing a book report on day two. And I don't know if I remember it correctly or not. I remember it looking more analog, as in a physical book and pen and paper. I could be misremembering it. I'm pretty sure there were physical books as opposed to Kindles or anything like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Maybe they were writing on a Chromebook. That part I can't quite remember, but they were doing a book report, so they were doing that. Um, so some of that's definitely happening, and questions like this came up from the parents as well, and the responses they were getting were along the lines of, "Yeah, they're absolutely doing that. We tend to guide them toward." There's a big focus on actually the way they structure it is, the way they talk about it is for the younger kids. Hope I'm getting this right. It's sort of the question they care about is not does the child want to go to the school? It's does the parent want them to go there? So they prioritize parent engagement when it's one of the younger kids going to their school. If they feel like the parent isn't sufficiently bought in, they might even decline them being able to go because you kind of have to be bought in because it's so different. But as they get older, when you take a more secondary high school level, they prioritize what the child wants and they care less about what the parent wants. They they spend a lot of time thinking and worrying about motivation. Their core texts that they'll talk about tend not to be the instructional theory Bibles. It's motivational Bibles. I think was it 9 to 5 something is one of them. Um, no, I can't dig up the book quickly enough. But I think it's been pretty popular. I've seen it crop up in a couple of other places. But or maybe it's 10 to 16 or something. It's basically about what motivates humans at different stages. The instructional side and the cognitive science, they are massive proponents of. Um, I saw Joe responding to, I think there was like a question from the audience about creativity or something like that. And he was pretty adamant that, we believe that comes from a position of great knowledge. You got to know a lot of things. They'd say how, what happens when you've got it. AI is a big thing for them, so a lot of AI analogies. What happens when you have an AI system that doesn't have a grounding in true knowledge? You get lots of errors, and we call those errors hallucination. What happens when you have people creating things and there isn't a ground truth of knowledge? It's kind of like we call it, we get errors again, and we usually call that making up bullshit. So the sort of strong belief in a pretty strong knowledge, I would say, running throughout the whole organization of theories of learning, cognitive science, theories of instruction. Um, but probably a lot of that is being handled more by the developers and the learning scientists. And then I think when speaking with parents, there's maybe a bit more of a focus on the motivational aspect, and there's a huge amount of focus goes on that. And wanting kids to, they've got 3 pillars, and one of them is, I think it's like smash your academics in 2 hours a day, and I've forgotten one of them, and the third one is love school. Yeah, why wouldn't you want to love school? That seems fair.
What what were the apps? What were they learning, Chris? Like, did you get a chance to have a look at like the maths apps or anything? How good was that?
Um, so most of the apps I saw I couldn't name because it was just an app that they were interacting with. There's I didn't get to see much by the way of AI integrated with the apps. The only instance of any kind of AI I could see was a writing app. The task the student was working on, they were presented with a simple sentence, and their job was to make it a more complex sentence with certain prompts. So it might be the simple sentence might be the snake slithered, and they have to say something about when this happened, where this happened, and something else. So they're going to then type up and they could make up anything, right? So with a traditional computer system, that doesn't work because I think maybe it was Adam or somebody else who talked about this. You have to account for everything that a student could possibly say on your back end of the system to say, oh, well, having said that, they get a tick. And that is very clunky. So what the LLM system would do is read what they said and then compare that with the prompt and say, oh, yeah, that lines up. Yeah, fair enough. We'll give it a tick and then move on. And you could tell it was an AI system because there was a delay while it was,
Hmm.
thinking. Um, Naveen got to see the time back system, the back end that the
Yeah.
guides were monitoring, which I didn't. I was focused on something else. From what I could tell, the no, sorry, that was the back end. The time back interface that the students have, I didn't see any of the sort of waste meter stuff. I
Yeah.
think they were using a earlier version of it, not that. Um, Naveen was blown away by the data that the guide was getting access to live to be able to monitor the kids and see how they were doing and go over and help them out if need be. In terms of the maths, in order, I will be honourable and it was a third party app that we're using, and I will protect the innocent by not naming them. But I saw 5 instances of it not being the kids sort of learning much from it. The kids were like struggling, stuck. I asked one of the lads what he thought, like what he thought something meant. That I was just trying not to help, not to be a teacher. Yeah, he was getting every question wrong, and I asked him what this might mean, and he was clearly he was bright one way or another, and he sort of had a. I think he had to divide a fraction by fraction, so it was weird, right? Because it had 3 lines. I was like, well, what do you think that means? I don't know. I think it might mean divide. Okay, well, if it means divide, then what would you do? And then he still got stuck with something else. Or just very inefficient, actually. The way that the task was set up, it was a column addition task with it was column multiplication. So you've got the multiplication had all been done for them. And then obviously you have to that then adds onto a column addition. And at the bottom is sort of 4 or 5 digits, and all but 2 digits were filled in. So now all they have to do is say what 2 digits go in there. And that should be really straightforward. You just add up those 2 columns, done. However, 2 things made it complicated. One, there was no instruction to do that. So I watched a girl who's one of the ones who was apparently struggling a bit more with maths. She was laboriously completing the entire calculation from scratch. And if she wasn't doing that, if she was just copying it down into a whiteboard, she didn't have to. So she was losing a lot of time that way. And then 2, to make it more difficult, all responses were handled through MCQs. And actually responding so the way the MCQ has to be set up is each of your response options is like this, like 3 and 5, or 3 and 7, or 4 and 5, or 4. So you've got to try to, it's a split attention effect. You've got to try to map what you're seeing in your MCQ responses to what you're seeing in the question stem above. Actually, it was much harder than just being able to write
Yeah.
in what the digits would have been. So I mean, they're using loads of different maths apps. But some of the ones I saw there, it's just there's still room for improvement. But I think that's what they're doing, right? They're building so many more of their own things internally now. And I've heard Zach Groschel is working on something which, I mean, Becky is pretty scathing of a lot of ed tech that I think goes her way. And of Zach's app, she described it as beautiful. So, and he's been working really hard to apply DI principles to it as well for this like K3 system, which would take you up to about year 4 for us.
Yeah,
So,
it's just on. So I've got Zach coming on the show, and hopefully, fingers crossed, he'll be able to tell us a bit more about it. The question I want to ask you, Kris, about all of this. So I asked Adam Boxer this, but over WhatsApp, because I only thought of it after I'd finished speaking to him, and I'll tell you Adam's response, and I want to ask the same thing to you. So Adam was very skeptical, if not outright ruled out AI being used in this way, for want of a better phrase, as a personal tutor. So I messaged him and I said, look, if you could have free reign to design the perfect, in Adam's case, science app,
yeah.
would you change your mind? And he said no. No. It's something fundamental about kids learning from a device, an AI, that he just doesn't think is right and doesn't think will work. What about you? What about for you, Kris? Is it so the
Okay.
apps you described there sound like they just weren't great, right? But if you've got all the time and all the resources and
Yeah.
you can design this in your image, would that
Yeah.
solve all the problems inherent that
So
that you
there's two different answers to that. And I'll preface them all with a third thing, which is important. There's, there's no AI tutor here that I've seen. So everything Adam
That's
was
fine.
saying about how, oh, well, you ask it this and you ask it this, and then you get around it. Or what I'm doing with the Claude and the learning to code and use Claude Code thing. Yeah, I could game that if I want and get it to give me the answers,
Yeah, yeah.
but there's nothing like that happening at Alpha School. And when I saw Joe speaking to the parents, he was adamant. His exact language was, "We call chatbots cheap bots. They're not allowed access to a chatbot during the beginning of the day. In the afternoon, they're allowed access if they needed it for whatever they're doing. But that's a completely different environment. You're not going to be tested on it. If you want to waste time, go ahead. You're doing these things because you're motivated to do it anyway, because that's what you've bought into. So that's a completely different environment. So that's the first thing that's important. So really, the question we're answering here is not whether or not you can learn from an AI system. It's whether or not you could learn from any digital system, however it's
Okay.
designed, whatever it incorporates. And I mean, Adam so the two parts of the question I'll give you. The first one is Adam is flat wrong, and he has been for a long time because this is a solved problem. We solved it with Uplearn. The issues that Uplearn, just as one example, and the issues that Uplearn face are things that are just difficult to overcome because of the way it was initially built, or it's things related to how the business would work later on. But if you could actually get somebody to sit down and work through the videos and learn from them, they would learn probably more than you would in most A-level maths classrooms, I would strongly suggest. I would put A-level maths teachers on that platform to brush up on their own A-level knowledge. That is solved. And you would do it in a fraction of the time than an A-level would ordinarily take as well. I mean, we had a case study of a girl who was about 12 or 13 who got an A star after about 300 hours. That's half what an A-level should take. So that part's already done. But there's a more interesting question around what does it, because I think there's something about the way you framed it or phrased it. Can't remember how you put it. So like, would that be like a good thing or something? So it was
Yeah,
less about what's
predominantly as
possible and
well.
more about the oughts. Like, should we
Mm-hmm.
have classrooms looking like that? Should we have schools looking like
Mm-hmm.
that? And
Mm-hmm.
it ties into your question about what surprised you. I suppose one of the things that surprised me, given that this was my own vision at
Yeah,
work,
yeah.
when they sort of got down to the, right, let's begin our on computer time, it felt a bit weird. I felt a bit uncomfortable. There was something about 15 kids. So they're all sat on, they're not at desks or anything. there are desks and there are all these different spaces, but it's also a bit like, imagine like a Google, we'd imagine a Google breakout room to look like. You've got lots of plush places to be sat. So they're just like sitting on these sort of nice plush sofas and chairs and things. I've got the Chromebook. They're just working through things. There's 2 or 3 guides who are at a desk somewhere with their own laptop. It's just all very silent, and everyone's looking at their own personal screen. And it almost starts to feel like, and everyone's doing different things as well. They're all doing their own thing. So something about it felt awkward. I spent quite a while trying to figure out, why do I feel awkward about this? Like, where's that feeling coming from? I think it might have been 2 things. One is, it seems reminiscent of almost that sort of dystopian view of, the family is sat around the living room and they're all staring at their own screen. There's something about that maybe that just sort of seeps through. And the um and it looks very passive and inactive. But then, in a classroom, one of the arguments I've been making for the longest time is, just because there's lots of activity doesn't mean physical activity, kinetic activity, doesn't mean there's much cognitive activity. And conversely, when I sit at my desk, like Becky said, when I sit at my desk all day staring at a screen, I probably look like I'm doing nothing. I probably look
Mm-hmm.
really passive, but my brain's on fire half the time. It's constantly thinking of things and doing things and prepping the next thing. So how do I know that's not what's happening for those kids, right? And then the flip of that question is, well, how do you know it is happening? And hopefully the answer to that is coming through the testing that is constantly being dripped into your system. So you should be able to assess for that. Um, so that only leaves one thing that is still an open question for me. I realized that there's something that for some reason that I can't necessarily put my finger on. Maybe it comes to a question you've been asking other people about learning as a social experience. There's something that feels valuable about X number of people, 5, 10, 30,
Yeah.
100, 200, all learning the same thing from some speaker at the same time, and all knowing that they are all learning that thing from that person at that moment in time. They're all hearing the same thing. So that's obviously not happening. You've got individual kids doing different subjects at different points along the way. And I don't think it's that I thought that was anyway. I think there's something about it that made me feel a bit uneasy, but I think that's just me being a bit weird because it's different, and I need to like get over that a little bit. When I think about it quite quickly, I'm like, no, it's silly to think that way. It's obviously fine. Also, the day that I saw, for whatever reason, they didn't do the Pomodoro break. And I would say that an hour, they did a 20-minute break in between, but I think an hour of everybody on their own laptop like that felt a bit long as an external observer. I don't know what it was like for the kids on the inside. They might have been perfectly happy. It just seemed a bit long.
But can I
I was
just
starting to
push?
get agitated. Maybe because I had nothing to do.
Can I just push you on this a little bit further, Kris?
Yeah.
Because that is the common argument that comes back, that learning is inherently social, and whether you come at it from a motivational point of view, that for some kids the only reason they will listen to that teacher and try their best is because they're kind of socially conditioned. They're surrounded by their peers. They don't, whether it's a fear of embarrassment, whether they want to,
Yeah.
use Dan Mayers, he doesn't know a kid who'd want to show off in front of an AI, but he knows kids who want to show off in front of teachers. Or whether you come at it from a attention thing, where it's perhaps, again, it's harder to sustain attention on a device
Hmm.
versus in a classroom of 30 kids and humans, blah, blah, blah. What do you think it is, Kris? Because you've read all the stuff, right?
Hmm.
You know the research into motivation, you know all the social conditioning, the norms, all that kind of stuff. It felt weird to you. What was your conclusion? Was it because it was just unusual, or do you
Um,
think there is something in it, that something important is lacking, or is it just that society is just not used to that way of learning?
Headline, I think it's just we're not used to it. Ultimately, I would say it's completely okay. It probably would have benefited from the 5-minute Pomodoro break,
Hmm.
saying as an external observer, but I think completely fine. Um, the So the whole point about schools creating normative environments where everybody does the thing because that's what you do in school. They're still in school. What's the thing that everybody does
Yeah.
during this period? They sit down at their computers and they get on with it. That's what everyone does. That's what everyone
Yeah.
did. So you've still got that normative influence there. Um, I think there is, I mean, the showing off thing, I don't know. Like, do you, motivation is more complicated than that. You can't really, but this, I mean, even when we talk about the motivation stuff, when we're talking about, we've got their attention and we're delivering some instruction, we're incredibly bullish, 100% success, barely any, just basically no doubt. When it comes to motivation, we're a little more cautious because that's where you start to get into more complex things. Can you get them to the point where they're attending? But there's a suite of about 5 things we think that in concert will probably bring on board nearly everybody, if not everybody. And in a similar way, Alpha School has just created a suite of things that ultimately motivate everybody. So that's everything from you get your afternoon to do lots of other things where you're not sat at the computer. It's 4 blocks of 25 minutes. That's nothing. Come on. And some of the things I've heard people say, like, I think maybe Dan gave an example, maybe somebody else, of like a child who's dysregulated and on the floor and they just need support, etc., etc., and oh, they just can't sit still for that long or whatever. I think I maybe even heard you make that case. Come on, no. I remember there was a lad from my very first year of teaching where he was he was pretty vile, but not in a way that he was never like not an aggressive, hostile way, the way some lads can be. Year 11 student. He was a bit of a almost like incidental or accidental bully. His teacher was a fellow teach firster, female. She had quite a few crying days because of her interactions with him. He would wander into the maths workroom as he pleased, very foul-mouthed for some reason. I mean, I'm just the new teacher, I don't know what I'm doing, but for some reason the experienced ones didn't chase him out. And then I remember towards the end of that year, we did a mock assessment. It was taken very seriously. He was sat at the front. I sort of checked his paper. He was basically done after 5 minutes. He couldn't do any of it. But for 2 hours, he sat there in absolute silence, perfectly well behaved. Why? Because for the first time all year, and I'd known him, there was just no reward for him acting up. You've got teachers patrolling every corridor. He knows he's going to just be dragged out right away. And there's no incentive for it. And so you've got punitive action and you've got no incentive for doing it. And all of a sudden, he's able to sit still, perfectly silent for 2 hours. Of course he can. It's just about the structures that we put around this. So 4 blocks of 25 minutes with stuff that is engaging you personally, I don't think is a big hassle. But then even if it were for some kids, I saw one lad, very young, must have been 5 or 6. I think he was their youngest. He was struggling. He really wasn't having any of it. And so then the next thing is they've got the guides. And that's their whole job. Their job is 100% coach and support and mentor and just help them to get on with it one way or another. I'm surprised nobody yet has talked about the payment incentives. So
Oh,
that's a
no.
big deal.
Hey, this is like a world exclusive. Go on, what have you got on this?
Well, it's all public knowledge, but so they've got minimum amounts of work they have to do each day. If they complete that, not only are they spending the afternoons doing whatever, but I think they get between $1 and $2 per day for hitting minimums or like some sort of stretch. Maybe it's like 100% you get $1, and I don't know, I'm making it up. But I think they get $1 to $2 a day. For the younger kids, that's sort of almost like alpha bucks that they could spend in a curated store. For the older kids, that literally goes onto a debit card they could spend anywhere in New York. Now, right away, that is going to kick off a whole bunch of emotions for people listening, which I know from conversations I've had with other people about it. A lot of people do not like this idea. But what I find interesting about it is that this is not the first time I've heard the idea. Alpha didn't make this up. The first time I heard this idea was from a documentary on education that for some reason David Baddiel was doing maybe 10 years ago. And he was just looking at all these different experiments people were running, trying to get kids to be more successful in school. And the last one he looked at, and the most successful one by far, these were schools in England, there was 2 of them. They were paying kids for something. I can't remember whether it was turning up or exam results or what it was, but they were getting better outcomes than everybody by just paying the kids for meeting certain criteria. And he also was getting into the whole, on the one hand, I feel really uncomfortable about this, something about it feels wrong, but on the other, it's working. I don't know what to do with that. I mean, the economics of it aside, and whether you can make it work in the state system, I suspect the reason we feel uncomfortable, the reasons people give, I think there's two things going on. The big reason everyone gives for being uncomfortable with it is they worry about extrinsic motivation and not developing intrinsic. I think there is research that shows, and then anecdotal evidence that shows as well, that I've encountered, that actually that concern is unwarranted, that they don't grow up learning, "Well, I'll only bother doing this if I get paid." That once you get into a subject, whether you're getting paid for it or not, if you find it interesting, you'll want to know more about it still. The same way that we can do our jobs every day because we're getting paid and we hate it, or we can do it and love our jobs and get really into it and do, multi-hour long podcasts about it because we just really enjoy talking about it. So I think the concern about not developing intrinsic motivation is probably not warranted. The second one that people generally don't bring up so much, but I think is really going on, is I think it creates subconscious sense in us of a lack of gratitude. That already anything from £6,000 to £9,000 in the English sector state, tens of thousands of pounds, tens of thousands of dollars are already being spent in your education. It benefits no one but you. Not quite true, it benefits society, but it's being done for you. And you're so ungrateful that you're saying you have to get paid a few dollars here and there to actually just turn up and benefit from this thing you're being provided for free. But hey, you know what, right? How many teachers grumble and gripe about having to attend some CPD session? Now, sometimes that might be because they've learned that CPD means we're going to teach you about the new initiative we're rolling out, and it's not really CPD. But even somebody we're working with in America, he's got a group of people that he's training up, and based on everything we've done working with him, they're really loving it. They're starting to get it. They're really excited. They're there because he's managed to secure funding for them at $80 a day to do this. And when I'm hearing that, part of me is thinking, this is all to benefit them. Why do they need more payment on top? It seems that it's just as true for adults as it is for kids. I mean, the rewards just aren't immediately apparent. They aren't immediately there. So if you're not intrinsically motivated right from the off, the extrinsic rewards, the amount of delayed gratification you need, it's just too abstract. It's too far down the line. So, so I think that's where some of the feelings of upset about it come from. I'm pretty okay with it. I don't mind. But regardless of one's moral position, the thing I think you can't argue with is it's effective for motivating. That's one of the other motivation systems they've got in there. So they layer up all kinds of, it's multi-layered motivation systems, including guides working with you over the years to figure out what you're personally interested in. They've got a whole system borrowed from a Japanese concept where they're looking at, it's something like 4 parts to it. It's like, what do you love doing? What does the world need? Good at? And then something else. And you use that framework to try to figure out what is the thing that is going to bring you, love and joy and passion in your life, but which is also going to do great things for society and benefit other people. That's sort of baked into how they're trying to develop and motivate the kids who are going to their school over years. So it's a complex system. There's actually a lot happening there. And they are spinning up new schools. I don't just mean they're expanding what they do already. I mean new concepts for what a school could look like every few months. While we're there, they announced 2 brand new ones to a group of parents, completely different from anything you've heard of so far. So the thing that is core every time is in the morning, 2 hours learning. And because we're so confident in that, your kids are going to get top AP grades, they're going to get top SAT scores, they're going to get to go to top colleges and universities around the world, which frees up all this time for us to imagine how they could spend the rest of their afternoons, their weekends, their evenings. And by goodness, they have big imaginations, like lots of different things that they could be doing with it.
Geez, Kris. Okay, right. So one little quick reflection, well, a little tip for listeners here. So the whole thing about paying kids has always fascinated me because, again, some intrinsically feels wrong about it. But then I try to be driven by data and evidence wherever possible. So one of my all-time favorite episodes of Econ Talk, which is my favorite podcast of all time, I've just looked it up now to get the right reference. Back in 2022, the guy called Roland Fryer, so he did a load of experiments on this, paying kids to like attend revision sessions, and experimented whether it's better to pay for the input, like them to turn up, or to pay for the output, what actually they get, and so on. It's a fascinating episode, and again, some quite counterintuitive findings. So I'll leave that for listeners to look up. But the question I want to ask you, Kris, as we kind of close out the Alpha School discussion, is when I was speaking to Becky, honestly, I was surprised just how all in she was on it. But again, when I then thought about Becky's history and views, I thought, well, maybe I shouldn't be surprised. But then, kind of as a bit of a twist in the tale, she's like, yeah, but it'll never work over here. Like, it can't scale because it would not work in, a UK comprehensive because we just don't have the structures in place. So where are you on this? Are you all in that this is the way schools should be? And could it work over here for your average comprehensive school?
I think with some of these questions, they're almost the wrong questions to ask because nobody knows.
Don't be saying that, Kris.
Really.
Come on. That makes me seem a bad podcast host. Come on.
They're the wrong question. Nobody knows the answers to them. We don't know what's going to happen. Should these people keep doing what they're doing, and should we want them to succeed? Absolutely. Why shouldn't we want them to succeed? If they could pull it off, then how wonderful would that be? Look at the promise that we're talking about here. And then when it comes to the implementation of the state system, I think both Becky and Adam said good things with respect to this. Now, Adam talked about how it won't, if anything happens, it won't be a revolution. It'll happen bit by bit. And then before you know it, yes, everything's different, but it took decades to get there. That's probably right. Like, are we going to see tens of billions of dollars invested in capital and programs and retraining? And what the hell happens to all the teachers if you just flip it? This is something that I don't think has been said clearly enough so far. There were no teachers at Alpha School, they are very, very clear about this. People keep saying, oh, they call their teachers guides. No, they don't. They have no teachers. So when it comes to the guides thing, these are your adult supports. They're there to help you. It's purely motivation and coaching. They are literally not permitted. Whether or not they do is a different question, but they are not permitted. They're not supposed to ever help a child with an academic question. And the argument for that is, I think Joe's words were, creating the cleanest data set we possibly can. If a kid's not learning because the app's not good enough, we need to know the app's not good enough. If a teacher intervenes and that helps them out, and we have no knowledge of that interaction, then how do we know that the app needs to improve? So there's a big bet that they're placing that the app can be made good enough. And then until then, Becky did point out there's like a button they can press. They can get subject support from somebody. But you can imagine by going through it that way, the button press is logged. Their video is probably recorded. The conversation is probably recorded. So again, they're generating data. So the kid gets help, but then they're generating data to improve the app still. So, and when they speak about this with parents, the argument is no teacher ever gets into school to grade papers. So we're removing all the things that are really unattractive about being a teacher and giving teachers what they most want, which is to be able to, to help support and grow and develop these students. I think there's a lot of truth to that if you're a primary school teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Because primary school teachers, very often when you ask them, they'll say, I don't teach subjects, I teach children. I think they're really in it because they want to spend their life interacting with kids and helping young children develop. But when you come to the secondary sector, I think we love our subjects. And I think we love interacting with people about our subject, and engaging with people who are learning about it for the first time. I think we find that really exciting and very rewarding. And you 100% don't get to do that if you're a teacher at Alpha. And I think that is probably one of the other things that I found a little unsettling as a secondary school teacher, just realizing, oh, I don't get to, all these things I love and I know about mathematics, I don't get to share it with anyone.
Yeah.
Which I can sort of tie into, I don't know if you had the question on here. I feel like you did, but now I can't find it in our notes.
Well, I'm asking by
questions. Oh, no, you
instead
did. Sorry. What's working and what isn't?
Yes.
I said they've got the same vision. It's actually about 95% overlap. So I think we and I used to think more in terms of we've cleared off all the things you need for your GCSE exam, or even your A-level exam, or even your Oxford Step paper, whatever it is. We've freed up all this extra time. We can now do things with mathematics you wouldn't ordinarily get to do. So if you had 5 lessons of maths a week, maybe 2 of them are on your apps. You've cleared the curriculum that way, and then 3 hours are done somehow differently. I started thinking interesting ways about how you might rejig the profession. So I think first and quite importantly, we probably don't need the whatever it is, 20 or 30,000 secondary maths teachers that we have or that we think we need. If you think about bell curve distribution, at the top end, it's Craig Barton in the classroom. At the bottom end, it is literally, we don't even have anybody in post. And we just grabbed anybody to be in there and do some stuff. And then moving up to some amount. I don't know whether it's we need 5% of all those people or 10% or 20%. I'm not upsetting anybody who's listening, because anybody who's listening to the Mr. Barton podcast is in that top X percent. It doesn't matter how small we make it. It's a vanishingly small number of people actually listen to these things and engage at this level. And those people, instead of having to teach everything from the ground up, imagine instead you get a small group of 5 or 10 kids and they already know loads of stuff and they're already mathematically fluent and arithmetically fluent. And you now just get to go into that really interesting, deep, ask me questions, probing questions, inquiry, investigate. You could do some really interesting stuff with that really brings the discipline of mathematics to life. I haven't yet seen directly a focus on that. So it's almost like academics and then everything else. The academics are crushed in 2 hours on the apps, and then there's everything else. But there's also something else interesting with the way they're structured. I think in terms of a philosophy or an ideology of what we think a school is or what we think
Yeah.
a school should be. They're very market driven. So part of the way I saw Joe talk about it was, how do we spend the afternoons? We know that 50% of parents and kids want to spend the afternoons doing sport. Now, that's partly because America. It's an American thing. Their sports have a different part in their culture relative to ours. There's different implications for doing that and getting into college than there are over here. But they're saying half the market want the focus to be on sports. And they'll still do other things. Like they'll do financial literacy, but they'll weave it into a sports context, like managing your contract as a professional player, that kind of thing. They'll say about 5% of people want that deeper academic thing. So I think people like you and me and probably most listeners would be like, yeah, it's deep on academics, really bring the discipline to life. We're thinking Dead Poet Society stuff. We're really getting deep into it. And he's just saying, yeah, great, but only 5% of the population want that. So what are you going to do? That's interesting. It's less, it's challenging and it's interesting. It's less we sit down in our ivory towers and tell you what an education ought to be, and much more, what do you want your education to be? What do you want your life to be? That is interesting. So I would like to see, I definitely would like to see more of that. I would like space for that. I think that their answer would probably be, yeah, but if you want that, we'll build it. If there's a market for it, we'll build it. They'll just build it. If there's a market for it, we'll build it. Obviously, it's not like that in the state sector, because in the state sector, there's less choice. It's more, our way of thinking is much more uniform. We want everything to be the same, and we want everyone to get the same provision. We don't think in terms of what do you want. Again, interesting, challenging. And then just to bring it back to, and I just said maybe that is happening at GT school, which is, I assume it stands for gifted and talented. Again, same 2-hour learning core. The whole point is they've got like the earlier schools, I think, were Alpha High when you get to secondary school, which is sort of, we guarantee you'll get 4s and 5s in your APs, I don't know, 1300, 1350 SAT, and you'll get into a good college. If you go to Alpha Scholar, it's straight 5s in your APs. It's 1450 out of 1600 in your SAT. You'll get into the best colleges. It's Ivy League. GT school is their level above Alpha Scholar. So that's where it's like everything we do in the afternoon, it is about the academics. So I don't know what that looks like because I've not seen it, but maybe that's where I find that thing. So just to bring it back to like Becky's point about it'll never happen, I don't know. Maybe she's right. But who knows? This is the thing. It's why it's not like a good question. We don't know. We don't know what's going to happen, really. I think really what she's saying is it would be challenging. It would be difficult. But if there were enough evidence there, if the technology moved in such a way that you could do it at relatively relatively cost effectively. If you figure out a plan that means you know what you're doing with all of your teachers, because suddenly, yeah, I don't think you could do what they're doing because there's no teachers. I think we want teachers. I think there's still going to be teachers. Maybe you don't want as many teachers. Maybe that helps with cost efficiencies. Maybe you pay the teachers you keep a lot more. You pay some other people who are non-specialist a bit less. And maybe that helps to make it all very cost effective. There's all these, but we don't know is the key thing. So where we're at right now is, and this is probably a good way to summarize that maybe and just sort of wrap up the alpha thing. What you've got going on over there, which is why people are suddenly talking about this, and it is genuinely really exciting, is a large group of unbelievably competent, unbelievably well capitalized people who are enormously invested in trying to make this work. Ironically, I think this is true, not for the purpose of making money. And I'm coming at that from the perspective, I mean, obviously they're making money. I'm sure they'll love to make more money out of it. They're American. But I think they're coming at it, they're already, this is a group of billionaires. They already have all the money. They're not doing it because they want more money, I don't think. They've got the networks. I think they're doing it because they're genuinely excited about what's possible. They're really excited about what's happened already. They have recruited some of the smartest, deepest thinkers that I know in the world on this stuff. And the whole point about not doing it for money, like as a sole motivator, matters because a lot of ed tech things fail because they go off in pursuit of money. It's unbelievably difficult to make money out of ed tech. What they're doing is building schools, and then they're selling a vision of schooling, which allows them to build out this technology. But they are their own customer. So we've never had anything like this as an operation in the history of education technology. I think there have been some attempts to do schools like this before. They haven't always panned out, but not with the level of technical competence that I've seen at every level, at the learning science level, at the operations level, at the finance level, at the engineering level. It's extraordinary. So something, and then I suppose the final part is rather just to, why wouldn't we want them to succeed? We should want them to succeed. Well, and then if they do, and we know that they do, and everyone's satisfied that the data says they've succeeded, then we can worry about things like, well, how do you make this work in a charter school where you don't have one guide for every 5 students? I think Becky said in the call it was like 1 to 20 over there. I think they hire one guide for every 5 students. So actually the ratios are quite different, unless it's different in Austin. That's just what I saw in the New York school. So yeah, that's kind of how I'd try to wrap it all up and tie it up with a bow for you as best I can.
That's lovely stuff, that Kris, and I'm sure we'll have plenty of follow-up questions for this when I do the 5 things I've learned write up. So we'll keep an eye on that. Now, I am besieged by the constraint that I am on tea making duty tonight, making chicken pasta, but I don't want to go without geeking out on some resource creation. So for the final 10 minutes, let's shift our attention to this, Kris. And let me frame it in this way, right? So you like. Ever since we've been chatting on the podcast and offline, I've always loved your view on your sequences of examples, non-examples, then categorical atoms, transformations, and so on. I love this stuff, right? And for years, my only option has been to write these by hand and then like share them with teachers and so on and so forth. And ever since I started messing with AI, I've been trying to get it to do it, and it's never been quite that. And I've fed it good examples, I've fed it crap examples, I've fed it parts of the Substack that you've written and so on. And it's only really in the last, I'd say 2 weeks, ever since I've really given it a good go on Opus 4.7, Claude's latest model, that I think it's getting to the level that I am at in terms of being able to write good sequences of examples or non-examples for categorical atoms. Now, that's not saying they're good, but when I look at them, I think, I don't think I could do a better job, and it's a collaborative process. But what I want to know, Kris, is as someone who's far more expert and experienced in this, where's it at for you currently in terms of being able to write the standards of resources that you pride yourself on?
First, you should definitely send some of those examples over. So I'd love to take a look and see whether I would agree there's nothing we could change or whether I could make some tweaks to it. So I tend to think about the learning experience as you've got this initial instruction, which is what you were describing. You've got initial testing, which is what comes immediately afterwards, which might be, say, 30 seconds later. It's quite rapid. You've then got expansion, which is where you're taking this core concept that you've learned, and now you're learning to apply it to ever greater novel situations. And then, as opposed to your point from earlier, you are kind of asking a question you haven't shown them how to answer yet there, but you're making the leap in logic so small that the odds of them being successful is very high. And then once you've done that, the idea is, well, you've learned this thing, you've learned it, well done, from the perspective of you can perform. But from the sort of long-term change in long-term memory perspective, we're going to have to do work over days and months, days and weeks and months before really it's just there as fingertip knowledge. So then working backwards, generating task sets that help with that practice, the AI is there, it can do it. It'll do it within the constraints you set it. It's absolutely fine now. It's perfect. It's
And
great.
that's
And it
because
seems to be able to do.
and that's because the sequencing doesn't matter as
Doesn't
much in
matter,
that
exactly.
phase, right?
The sequencing doesn't matter. Every question you're being asked there is one you have seen previously under very tightly guided teacher-led instruction mini whiteboards. Then, or it certainly matters less. Then, but for all the first three stages I mentioned, especially the initial instruction and the expansion, I've just yet to see it work. So either I'm not prompting it well enough, or I mean, I have fed it my entire program to date, every script we have for every video on the platform, and it still can't identify the type of atom correctly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Still. I've had to dissect entire curricula for Australia and America, and it gets the type of atom wrong every time.
Yeah.
So that's it doesn't get it wrong every time, but it's always imperfect. It's and too imperfect. Like, even if it's 80% good, I'm at the point where I'm saying, just leave the type of atom column blank. I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
I'll do
Yeah.
that. That's where I'm at, because I'm going to have to check them all anyway. And then somewhat similarly for the sequences as well. I don't know. I haven't seen it do it yet, but I'd love to see the examples you've got it to generate. But what I am really excited about is, so we're now working on a program that I'm calling Unstoppable Arithmetic. And this is because arithmetic is the biggest barrier to success throughout the mathematics curriculum. So we take a sort of three-part approach to it with teachers. The first thing we tell them to do is just avoid it. Avoid arithmetic whenever you can. So this is the whole, give me the expression that would tell the area of the trapezium. I don't need you to crunch any numbers. And even with top sets, we'll advocate for that, because if you do that, you're continually practicing the thing that is mathematical, which is forming the structure and selecting the correct lengths to put into it. After that, it's bit mass, it's order of operations, and it's number crunching, which is a part of mathematics, but it's not the whole thing. And it's the part that we struggle with the most as humans. We all do. You and I do. We will get slowed down by the number crunching. We will not get slowed down by the other thing. So that allows you to work really very, very rapidly, develop fluency and mastery with the bit that really matters. The second thing we'll say is, if you can't avoid it for one reason or another, especially if you just need to give them a few tasks where they have to do the number crunching, make the numbers really easy. Use 10s and 5s and 3s, easy numbers to multiply and work with. But the final bit is, well, you need to be able to do the number thing in order to do well in the exam. So how do we get there? And I think the sort of failure mode for this most often is, we have the spiral curricula with 1 or 2 weeks on a unit. So maybe you've got 1 week on negative numbers. And in 1 week, you have to communicate negative numbers as a concept. And you have to teach them how to add and subtract negatives, for which there are 16 different cases once you map them all out, depending on what you're starting with and where you're ending up. And then you've got multiplication and division, easy to get mixed up with addition and subtraction. Then you get into multi-term stuff. And you've got 4 lessons maybe to do that. And then negative numbers just disappears and you're on to the next unit. Even if you had 2 weeks, that wouldn't be enough. So instead, we've got a program which runs over, depends on how many lessons. I think it's 123 lessons, about 2 minutes per lesson, in 8 phases. And phase 1 is just subtracting from a negative. So there's a very repeatable pattern there. -10 subtract 5 is -15. You're always adding the sizes. The result's always negative. The next phase And then the first minute is spent just doing that. The second minute interleaves it with adding positives, just a normal thing. So 10 plus 5. The second phase, the new task is determine what sign the result will have. That's all. Is it going to be negative or positive? So your focus minute is always a negative positive combination. And obviously you're selecting the sign based on the size of the number. The bigger size gives you the sign. It's all you're doing. Your interleaved set is doing that plus the two things from the last 8 weeks. And that's 10 weeks on just deciding the sign. And then you get into phase 3 of C, and now you have to evaluate. So now you're not only deciding the sign, but you have to find the difference every time. And then that gets interleaved again. So we're doing that over 100 lessons, but just 2 minutes per lesson. And can you imagine how tiny the instruction would be? If you had to do any instruction at all, can you imagine how tiny it's going to be, explaining what the kids have to do, then really focus practice, then interleave practice every day for just 2 minutes. You're going to have every single one of your kids able to do negative arithmetic in no time at all. It's going to be fine. Well, it's going to be exactly 123 lessons. So that's where we started, but we also have that for fraction. We've got something on times tables. It's nowhere, it's obviously not times table rock stars. My thing for that is always go to times table rock stars, but it's important, so we have a little something. So all your fraction arithmetic in there, we're looking at ratios, percentages, etc. But the key point is it would have been impossible to build it as quickly as we had without Claude. And what's happening is lots of back and forth with Claude co-work saying, and so I'm doing all of the strategic thinking. This is how we're going to structure it. This is what I want the tasks to look like. This is what I want the layout to look like. This is what all the things need to look like. So you have all the ideas, and then actually, can you imagine then having to actually generate thousands and thousands and thousands of tasks? You're just there for weeks and months generating them. And instead, it gets it done in a few hours. I mean, just dipping into it back and forth while I'm doing other stuff, 5 days and it's done, and then we're on to the next one. So for that kind of thing now, it's there, and we can probably do that for any topic. So that's not the initial instruction, that's all the practice you need. But then I guess for us, we're showing the teachers how to do the initial instruction. That actually that doesn't take long. It's the generating the practice task sets afterwards. And now we already know how to do that as part of structured programs. So we're creating a structured and unstoppable arithmetic. We're thinking of putting on an event as well for our members, showing how we do this with Claude. So you can then generate your own sets of tasks, a bit like what you've got with all of your task generators online, for everything that they've taught their kids so far. So it's completely game changing, and I think this is just since Opus 4.7. 4.7 totally different to 4.6 in a really positive way for the type of work I'm doing. I think the type of work you've been doing as well.
And again, Kris, I could talk all day about this. I'm gonna have to ask you another question.
Okay.
Just one. My wife's gonna kill me, but it's worth it. She'll understand if I say I'm late because I'm talking about Claude. She will.
Yeah.
What's your view? Do you think this is a good thing generally for teachers, right? Because this is the position I'm in, right? I absolutely love chatting away to Claude building these resources, particularly if you kind of give it enough context and prompt it in the right kind of way. And the resources that we were talking about before, my attempts at getting it to do the categorical atoms, I've shared on my ED newsletter in the most recent one. So I'll link to that in the show notes. And it's done like a really good job. I used to do like the PowerPoint morph thing, when you've got to show the minimal changes. Claude like laughs at me when I say, do you need to do that? It's just animates it beautifully. Like you've got, you've got curved sides, just beautifully forming straight sides. It's like a dream, right? So I'm doing all this, and two things I'm thinking. I'm thinking, right, the output I'm getting is at a different level than what I could do myself in a lot quicker time. I just physically couldn't do it. But the other thing I'm thinking is I'm getting smarter doing it. Like I'm learning because I've told it to push back at me and give me the reasons why it's pushing back. So it feels like we're having a proper dialogue on this. But Kris, is this just because me and you are like a little bit weird with this kind of stuff, that we love this kind of like the intellectual challenge of this? We like going deep in this. Do you think this is inherently a good thing that teachers have got the opportunity to interact with it in this way? Or do you think unless you're willing to put the time in, and also unless you're willing to spend the money to get the top model, you're actually better off just downloading something that's already been created by somebody else. Where do you think this sits for your average day-to-day teacher? Should we encourage them to experiment with this, or should we just say, look, let's just stick to the sources that you know?
Depends on how much time an individual teacher has. I think you do need the more expensive models. They're 75 to £200 a month. I think that's institutional prices. I think a school could consider paying for that. And then you've got to figure out how you give access to different teachers for it. But that is a lot for an individual to pay. So that is straight out the gate going to rule out lots of people. It's not going to, nowhere near going to have the ability to spend that kind of money playing about with this to see if it's helpful. Um, in terms of learning from it, I mean, isn't this just the same with anybody interacting with any material ever? It's just another tool, and what you get out of it is going to be a function of how you already think. Like some people speed through books and they'll get through the book really quickly, and they could say they've read 3, 4 times as many books as you have, but they haven't learned as much because their metric for success was I closed the last page. Whereas somebody else might go more slowly and have lots of conversations with themselves or friends or write notes in the margin, and they don't get through as many books, but the ones they do, they learn a lot from them and remember a lot of it. So I think it's just similar to that. I mean, we can't really be answering questions about whether teachers should do A, B, or C because it depends on the individual teacher and it's available to everyone. It's sort of up to me and Craig to say you're not allowed Claude or ChatGPT. It's already out there. I guess it's a bit like what's happening now with universities and the exam system. You can say you shouldn't cheat on your essay. So what? If a kid wants to, they're gonna. And I mean, I remember my first year at university, I did a lot of copying answers off a friend of mine from our weekly questions. So, who am I to judge? Maybe if I could have just put it in ChatGPT, I would have done that. It depends on where your head's at the time and how you think about these things. Obviously, you'll learn more if you approach it a certain way. Get to interact with it a lot for things that I previously had no experience around accounting and legal and finance. And I would never like put a contract into Claude and say, evaluate this for me. And then it says, here's your evaluation, and then do whatever it told me to do. I'm then going to spend days reading the contract and reading what it said and making sense out of it and learning the law as I go along. So maybe somebody else wouldn't do that. Somebody else might just say, I ain't got time for that. They'll just take whatever it spits out. And that's the risk they've chosen to take. I don't know. It's just people
It's
being people.
final thing, just to try and articulate a bit more clearly what I meant by this. Let's imagine, Kris, you've got a teacher listening to this, right? They're a maths teacher, and they've got a finite amount of time to prepare for a lesson tomorrow, right? And let's keep it really crude here. They've got three options. Option one is they try to build something by hand themselves from scratch, which I know I certainly spent the first 5 years of my career doing, and it still happens in a lot of the schools I visit today. So that's option one. Option two is they take something that's already been made. Perhaps it's on their department's secure area, perhaps it's on a blog website
Yeah.
that they already use. They download that, and perhaps they spend that finite amount of time that they've got preparing to use that resource. Maybe they adapt it in some way, or maybe they just spend a bit of time going through the answers and thinking, okay, my kids might get stuck on that question and so on. So that used to be the only two choices, but now we've got a third one, which is, okay, we're going to crack open ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, and we're going to say something along the lines of, I'm teaching my year 8 bottom set, adding and subtracting fractions tomorrow. Today I taught them equivalent fractions, and a few of them struggled on this, this, and this. I want a resource, a worksheet of 10 questions. I'm a big fan of Kris Boulton, so could you include a bit of minimally different changes in there or whatever? And the output comes out from that, and then they perhaps evaluate it, go back and forth with that. What do you think? What's the way for your average teacher, what should they do out of those three? Because a lot of teachers will feel pressure to kind of experiment with this. And I know you're going to say, look, we shouldn't be saying what teachers should do and shouldn't do. But what do you think is going to lead to the best outcome for their kids and also for them professionally?
Well, first and foremost, I can tell you the answer for your average teacher right away. They're going to do number two, take something already made, and they're not listening to this podcast right now. The average teacher is not listening to this podcast. They're not going to do something by hand. They're not going to bother wasting time on AI. They'll take whatever's made, they'll go in, they'll deliver it. And we very, very often forget what average in the school system
Yeah.
really
Okay.
looks
Yeah.
like.
Fair point.
So that's the answer to that one. That was really easy. The second thing you've got to factor in is it's not just I've got a lesson tomorrow and I've got to do this. It's I've got 20 lessons next week, or
Yeah.
22 or 23 lessons. So whatever I do has got to work for 23 lessons next week, not one lesson tomorrow.
Yeah.
So doing something by hand for all of those is out straight away. AI for most people is out straight away because it takes a certain amount of time to do
Yeah.
this. So straight away we're back to it's number two, take something
Yeah.
already made because it's the fastest and most efficient. Now, where you could theoretically start to change this in a few different ways. One, you can experiment with doing something by hand or by AI for maybe 1 out of 23 lessons. You can do that. And if you do that, you're doing it because you have an interest in learning already. If you don't have an interest in learning, you're taking something already made for all of your lessons. And then that is, we're back to your average teacher. So now the question is really just, should you use AI to learn from the process, or should you do it by hand? And you'll probably, if you're really interested in learning, you'll probably do both. The AI is going to take X amount of time anyway, processing each command, especially in code work. So you might do your own version, you check out its version. Maybe it does better than you because you're still early on the journey. Maybe you think you've done better than it, but regardless, that whole process you're going to be learning from. The fourth thing I put in, which you didn't say, which I would say, is, which I think is quite important. There is a fourth option, which is you do what we do, as in you learn how to do what we do. Because once you learn how to do what we do, it takes a little bit of learning, but people are surprised by how quick it gets. Teaching's unbelievably fast to design because you're teaching for 30 seconds. Oh, okay, all three sequences all together, it's maybe a few minutes, but you can design that on the back of an index card in almost no time at all. The exceptions would be things that require lots of diagrams, but now AI is going to be really useful for you because you can define what you'd want the diagrams to look like and how they're going to vary from one to the next. The AI will generate the images for you, and it'll now do it very accurately. If you're using your voice to text interface, you can sort of ramble that at it in a way that would make no sense to a person, and it'll just get it and do it. That's way better. Can you imagine being there with PowerPoint? By hand, what we mean is you're fiddling about with PowerPoint, trying to do lots of these things. You don't have to do that anymore. So that's really powerful. But then also, once you've done the design of that, which isn't going to take you that long, as I said, once you get in the flow, what's next is your practice set. And as we already mentioned, the AI is actually pretty good at generating a practice set. And if you've done something to input one way or the other what your instructional set looks like, it knows to only select practice tasks that match the form of everything in there. Now, that's going to include tasks that were in your expansion sequence, which you won't find in anything else because no one else is really designing things like that yet. And so now you've got something which is probably going to be really exciting for the kids to work with. This is before we get into issues with spiral curriculum. So you probably want a more stranded curriculum, which means in every lesson, you don't have a learning objective and you're not, today's lesson is on this one topic. And it's not, I'm spending half the lesson or more teaching you new things and then lots of practice on those things. It is 20% of your lessons on something new, which, as we've already talked about, it's pretty quick. So now you can do that because it's only 12 minutes. And now you need lots of practice, which is going to be segmented in different ways to retain attention and energy levels. But they're going to have to be interleaved sets at a bare minimum. So you're saying, well, here are different topics we've done previously. I need a practice set which covers all these things. I can either do it in blocks, like 8 things, and it's blocks 1 through 8, or I could say it's 8 topics, but I want it all completely mixed up. And that's impossible to do by hand. The AI can now do that for you. So just to sort of summarize it all again, first of all, the average teacher is going to just not do any of this and take whatever's made. The average teacher is not listening. So what are the teachers who are listening do? They're listening because they want to learn. How do you learn? You can learn by doing things by hand. However, the AI is now capable of really supercharging what you're doing if you've got time to invest. It's almost like activation energy. You need a certain amount of time to get over this really confusing wall of how do I use it? Because it's so open that it's almost counterintuitive, or it's unintuitive how it works. Um, but once you get over it, it could be very powerful. You are going to have to splurge. There's no way you can do it. You could experiment at 20 quid a month or 12 quid a month, and you'll get a sense for how it works. But as soon as you get into a few back and forth, you're going to hit the usage limits and get frustrated and probably need to stump for 75 quid a month. But then finally, actually, I think if you integrate it with what we're doing around the initial instruction and testing and expansion, I mean, that again is like supercharge on top of supercharge, because it's suddenly that part you can manually design quickly and easily, even if the AI can't do it. But then when you get into, but how do I do retrieval properly, which isn't like 4 questions in my do now? How do you do that properly to guarantee kids are going to remember everything? Similar to what I described with that negative numbers thing, 123 lessons over 8 phases. Now the AI can build that for you in next to no time, and it'll just get it right, and it'll be very usable. So that's kind of how I'd build that up. That's how I think about it.
That is a lovely summary, Kris. Love it. Right. What should listeners check out of yours, Kris? And we'll put links to all of these in the show notes page.
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously, I think that more than the website, the big thing to go to is the Substack, because the Substack's live. We have new posts nearly every week. Naveen's writing on that. I'm writing on that. So it's just loads more information there and lots more to get your teeth into. Next thing is probably the website, unstoppablelearning.co.uk. Just, I mean, it needs a big update. It needs more love and attention. But we've also recently updated some stuff with case studies and things, just things that other people have written actually that are out there. We've pinned to those on the website now, so you can. Becky's got one that we've pinned on there, so you can read what other people are saying. And then as a part of both of them, you can get to this. You actually can't get to this through the website, so we haven't made it properly public yet. You can only get to it through the Substack or by listening to the Mr. Barden podcast. So we're keeping the network pretty small right now. It's really exclusive. So we don't want it to go beyond 60 schools in this year. So we've only really talked about it via the Substack or occasionally on some of these podcasts. And we're nearly halfway through the year. We've got about 50% of those schools on board. So there's still space for 30 more schools. And that exclusivity allows us to do a few things in this early year and make sure that we're working with schools and with chains of schools who are just really excited about this and are really committed to the idea that every one of their kids is going to be suddenly successful and have their outcomes in mathematics transformed. So, I mean, you can find details about that in nearly every Substack post. There's an easy way to check it out. But for individual teachers, it's quite tough. You can, like I say, you can get in touch and, we keep everybody on file. But there's probably not much we can do yet. But certainly for anybody who's heading up a department at least, or anybody who's in a senior leadership position or working in a central trust, we can move pretty quickly to onboard one or more schools in that network. And then all the things I've been talking about, you actually get to roll that out pretty quickly. So, which is really exciting.
Well, Kris Boulton, I'll put links to all of those in the show notes page. Always a pleasure, mate. Let's not leave it too long before you're back on again, but thank you so much for your time today.
I'm already looking forward to it. Thanks so much, Craig.